Russia had a man who terrified kings, enthralled queens, and haunted the streets of St. Petersburg. His name was Grigori Rasputin. Whispers followed him everywhere: holy man or demon, miracle healer or predator of the innocent. He rose from the frozen wastes of Siberia to the gilded halls of the Romanovs, wielding influence no one dared question. Scandal, sex, and rumor clung to him like a second skin enough to make priests, politicians, and even the Tsarina herself tremble. And yet, despite threats, poison, and bullets, the man who should have been dead lived to tell the story and to curse a dynasty. In 19th century Siberia, the snow buried secrets, and one child was born into them. Grigori Rasputin entered the world in 1869, no prophecy, just poverty and silence. Parish records list him plain. Later, rumors would call him cursed. Villagers said horses calmed when he stared at them. Others whispered he stole and never felt shame. Siberia was brutal. Faith there wasn't gentle, it was survival. Rasputin grew restless, drinking, fighting, disappearing for days. Some claimed he spoke with spirits. No proof, only fear. Siberian folklore would later turn him into something inhuman. But in the beginning, he was just a man, watching, learning, waiting. By his 20s, Rasputin was no longer just unruly. He had become a man villagers genuinely feared, a presence that unsettled even hardened Siberian peasants. Witness accounts described him as volatile and intense, half-wandering mystic, half-unpredictable menace simmering beneath the surface. Then came the horse theft accusations documented in local accounts, charge that could have destroyed his reputation permanently. In Tsarist Russia, theft meant public humiliation, prison, or exile deeper into the frozen wilderness. Instead of chains, Rasputin turned toward a monastery, seeking refuge behind orthodox walls rather than facing a courtroom. Inside, tavern noise was replaced by fasting, silence, and relentless prayer beneath flickering candlelight. A monk named Makary reportedly urged repentance and discipline, demanding obedience to God over impulse. Rasputin later claimed visions overwhelmed him, their brilliant light, sacred voices, divine instruction guiding his path. Yet official church records show he never formally took vows, never became a recognized monk within the Orthodox hierarchy. When he finally left, he abandoned his wife and children without hesitation, choosing the open road over domestic duty. By 1903, the Siberian wanderer entered St. Petersburg, the glittering imperial capital where gold domes hid political decay beneath polished marble. He arrived dressed like a peasant from the frozen east, yet his stare carried an unsettling intensity that unsettled even hardened aristocrats. At first, high society treated him as a rural curiosity, an exotic pilgrim pulled from Siberia's endless snowfields. Rumors spread quickly that his prayers calmed the sick and eased suffering without medicine, only faith and touch. Others whispered something darker, that his presence felt hypnotic, that women left his chambers shaken, devoted, and silent. Among his earliest and most powerful supporters were the Montenegrin sisters, Militsa and Anastasia, deeply drawn to mysticism. Society elites mocked them as the Black Peril, claiming they filled the palace with occultists and wandering holy men. It was these sisters who opened the right doors, introducing Rasputin to bishops, ministers, and those desperate for divine intervention. Church leaders were divided. Some praised his devotion, while others warned that charisma without discipline could corrupt the throne itself. Within 2 short years, the Siberian pilgrim had crossed invisible lines, moving from salon spectacle to the threshold of the Romanov dynasty. In 1904, the long-awaited heir, Alexei Romanov, was born to the Russian throne, fragile, adored, and carrying a secret that would terrify the empire. Doctors soon confirmed the diagnosis, whispered in dread: hemophilia, the royal disease that turned minor bruises into potential death sentences. A simple fall could mean internal bleeding, unstoppable, invisible, and fatal. No cure existed in the medical science of the time. When conventional medicine failed, desperation replaced protocol, and Rasputin was summoned to the palace. Witnesses recorded that he stood beside the boy's bed, silent, unmoving, his pale eyes fixed in intense concentration. Within days, the bleeding subsided. Court diaries described it as a miracle. Modern historians suggest a simpler explanation. Rasputin advised doctors to stop administering aspirin, unknowingly preventing further blood thinning. By calming the anxious mother and reducing medical interference, he may have stabilized both the boy and the court itself. From that moment forward, Alexandra believed Rasputin was divinely sent, her son's protector chosen by God. And with that belief, the Siberian mystic gained something far more dangerous than wealth-infiltrated access to the Romanov throne. As Rasputin's access to the palace deepened, so did the rumors surrounding his private life, whispers that blurred devotion with desire. Several female followers described intense spiritual sessions that critics claimed crossed moral boundaries. One of the most devoted was Olga Loktina, who believed he was a holy man chosen by divine will. Letters from disciples reveal emotional attachment, language of sin and salvation intertwined in troubling ways. St. Petersburg gossip escalated into bathhouse stories, claims of impropriety repeated in taverns and salons alike. Whether exaggerated or fabricated, the allegations spread faster than facts, fueled by resentment toward his influence. Church leaders attempted to confront him directly, among them Bishop Hermogen and the fiery monk Iliador. They accused him of heresy, manipulation, and corrupting the moral authority of the church itself. Yet each attempt to discredit him seemed only to deepen the mystique of public attacks, transformed him into a darker legend. By 1916, Rasputin was no longer merely a spiritual advisor. He had become a symbol of corruption, fear, and unseen control within the empire. By the outbreak of World War I in 1914, Rasputin was no longer confined to prayer rooms. He was influencing decisions at the highest levels of government. Surviving correspondence suggests he advised Tsarina Alexandra on ministerial appointments, urging loyalty over competence during a time of instability. Between 1915 and 1916, Russia saw rapid turnover in key government positions, fueling claims that the holy man manipulated the cabinet. Meanwhile, Tsar Nicholas II took personal command of the army, leaving the capital politically exposed. The war spiraled into catastrophe, millions dead, supply lines collapsing, railways overwhelmed by mismanagement. In Petrograd, bread lines stretched 4 blocks as famine and inflation crippled the population. With the Tsar at the front, Alexandra relied heavily on Rasputin's counsel, deepening public suspicion. Propaganda leaflets began portraying him as a dark puppet master, controlling the throne from the shadows. To some peasants, he remained a mystic protector. To urban elites, he embodied corruption and decay. By late 1916, Rasputin stood at the center of a collapsing empire, feared, revered, and blamed for a crisis he did not create but undeniably influenced. Long before the final conspiracy took shape in Petrograd, there had already been serious attempts on Rasputin's life, clear evidence that resentment against him had moved beyond gossip and into violence. In July 1914, a religious fanatic named Kionia Gaseva approached him outside his home in Pokrovskoye and drove a knife deep into his abdomen. The wound tore through his intestines, and doctors initially believed survival was nearly impossible. Yet after weeks of infection, fever, and surgery, he recovered. That survival strengthened the myth already forming around him that he was protected by divine forces or simply impossible to kill. By late 1916, however, opposition shifted from lone attackers to members of the aristocracy, who believed he was poisoning the monarchy from within. The central figure in this plot was Prince Felix Yusupov, joined by Grand Duke Dmitry Pavlovich and politician Vladimir Purishkevich. Men convinced murder was patriotism. On the night of December 30, 1916, Rasputin was invited to the Moika Palace under the false promise of meeting Yusupov's wife in private. According to Yusupov's later memoirs, cakes and wine were laced with cyanide, yet Rasputin appeared unaffected, continuing to eat and drink without visible collapse. Panic set in. Multiple gunshots were fired in the palace basement, and accounts conflict on how many times he was struck before falling. His body was eventually transported and thrown into the icy Neva River. An autopsy reports alongside later memoirs created contradictions that blurred fact and legend. Weeks earlier, Rasputin had reportedly written that if he were killed by nobles, the Romanov dynasty would fall within 2 years, an ominous warning that seemed fulfilled in 1918 when revolution ended imperial rule. Rasputin rose from a Siberian peasant to the inner circle of imperial power, feared by ministers, trusted by a queen, and tied forever to a collapsing dynasty. He did not cause Russia's fall, but in a time of war, famine, and chaos, he became its most feared symbol. His story warns how unchecked influence, blind faith, and political weakness can rot a nation from within. To some, he was a healer, to others, a manipulator. The truth remains debated, and that mystery keeps his legend alive. Rasputin endures because he embodies power, fear, and decay. If you believe history should be examined honestly, without heroes, without excuses, then you belong here.